Award last year. Would you please give a very warm welcome to our final speaker for today, inventor, scientist, and all-round humanitarian, Ray Avery.
Thank you. Andy and I were talking just before I came on the stage, and he asked me what I was going to talk about, and I said, I'm an innovator, I'll work it out, And, but I have to tell you that the T-shirt is from Hallenstein's, the socks are from Mumbai, the shoes are from Thailand, my watch is from China, my glasses are from Nepal. I'm your global fashion statement. which explains why I'm not also on Facebook. But what I'm going to talk about today is two things, really. My innovation from an academic scientist to an applied scientist, and my journey in that road to make a difference in the world. And one of the things that happens with New Zealanders is that we're sequestered away from the rest of the world. And how does that impact on the way that we see the world and how we think? So each year, an American organisation publishes some results from the world's most innovative nations. And where do you think New Zealand sits on that? I mean, can we just have a show of hands? Do you think we're an innovative nation? Can we just have a show of hands? We're a reasonably innovative group of people. Well, we do, I think. But when you look at the 25 nations that are actually published in this annual review, you'll see, for instance, that India is 0.02%. Our good friends in Australia are 1%. And the highest scoring nation is actually Southern Korea at 2.55. And where do you think New Zealand is, We don't get a mention. Of course, we're special because we're hidden down here in what I like to refer to as the Antarctic Riviera. Nobody knows nobody knows we're here, And this is good, in a nuclear holocaust. Nobody knows we're here. We can hide, But I'd like to have another premise as a scientist that, can I just have a show of hands of how many people have heard of Colin Murdoch? Okay. How many people in the room have had an injection at any stage in their life? Everybody. So you all actually know of Colin Murdoch's invention. Because Colin Murdoch was a New Zealander who invented the disposable hypodermic syringe, which changed the world. Without it, we'd have pandemics and all sorts of terrible things happening. How did that happen? Well, Colin, to understand how that happened, we really have to understand the way that we accrue knowledge. So let's have another little experiment that shows us, because I'm a scientist, so just bear with me. But what's sursonate donation? Can we have a show of hands for sursonate donation? Right. Okay, how many people have seen the Coro sign where the fern leaf unravels and you've seen it on the symbols throughout New Zealand, on Air New Zealand? How many people have seen that? Pretty much everybody. Sursonate donation is the Latin term for how that happens. And that's the difference between academic knowledge and applied knowledge. When you see something, you can touch it and you can make something of it. And that's what we're good at. Because we're only 5 million people. We can't delve into great depths of, science in terms of, Avogadro's number is 6.023 times 10 to the 23. We can't get there. But we can actually look at something and watch gravity at work, or we can watch something practical happen. We can take that knowledge and adapt it. And that's what we're good at. So when Colin Murdoch was sitting at his kitchen table one day, he was a pharmacist from Timaru, great friend and a mentor to me. He was sitting there and he took a big pen apart. And he thought, that's a nice bit of plastic. If I could put a plunger in there, I could make a disposable plastic hypodermic syringe. So he went off into his garage, switched on the lathe, and for those people who are watching from America, everybody in New Zealand has a garage and a lathe, and that's what we do. We invent stuff, So he made the disposable hypodermic syringe, and it changed the world forever. One man that nobody ever heard of. That's what New Zealanders do. Colin is an inspiration to us all, and he was an inspiration to me in terms of how I changed from being what could be seen as an academic scientist to an applied scientist. In England, I was brought up in orphanages, and I was always interested in science, and I would pull things apart. And as a young boy, I used to go to the wrecker's yard and get bicycles and then repair them and put them together. And in doing so, I learnt about bicycles. And my ambition at the age of 7 was to own my own bicycle shop. This will become relevant later on. But fortunately, I moved on from that and took science degrees and went into the commercial fundamental research establishments in the United Kingdom. And at the age of 26, I was one of 23 world experts on the Hill reaction of photosynthesis. Great. And I was waiting every time I went to a dinner party for somebody to bring it up, you know. Because, what's the role of metalloproteins in the Hill reaction of photosynthesis? It never happened. Never happened. So I was forced into the conclusion that I should actually become an applied scientist and work out how I could use applied science to make a difference in the world. And I was also fortunate enough to come to New Zealand, where knowledge is not sequestered. Knowledge is actually open source. People will help you with any of your endeavours. And what I'm going to talk about now is how I went through that transition from an academic scientist to a slightly dangerous social entrepreneur who actually is a little bit mad in the sense that he actually now believes that with a lot of help, I can change the world. So let's just go through this little presentation, which really illustrates the problem we have in our world, that 90% of the world's wealth is concentrated in what we refer to as the developed world. And only 10% of that wealth is in developing countries. And of course, the burden of disease is in those countries where they don't have any money. And as a scientist, I realised I had a social responsibility to try and address those issues. But it wasn't a catharsis that happened overnight. In fact, it happened quite by accident, as you'll see later on. But what we're talking about here is also a huge commercial opportunity for commercial development. It's an emerging market, the developed world market, and if we can in some way engage with that market, we can actually make the world a much more egalitarian place. For instance, in China, in 2020, there's going to be a huge middle-class population that we can sell stuff to. And we've got to try and find some way to engage with these countries and make some product offerings that address the inequities. The way to look at developing countries, the more time I spend in developing countries, the more I realise that they are very innovative countries and that they can adapt to any technology that they absorb. So companies that are smart enough to deploy some of their intelligentsia to targeting products for the developing world market are going to prosper, because that's the new frontier, it's the new Wild West. You've got global marketing opportunities in healthcare, education, telecommunications, manufacturing, technology transfer. And to give you a practical example of how we can learn from developing countries, if you go to Nepal, for instance, you can rent some time on a cell phone. You can just go to the shop, put in a few rupees, and you can rent some time on a cell phone. But the little trick that I love is that not only in Nepal can you buy a single cigarette, you can buy a puff of a cigarette. Yes, hey, think about that. So you actually don't need to be burdened with carrying cigarettes. And the trick, we see these guys, the guys that sell the puff don't let it out of their own hands, you see. So, because if they did, you might take a bigger drag than normal. So these guys can whip it back. So you can actually go from one place to another and have a cigarette. And but somebody saw a marketing opportunity for even the lowest paid person having a purchasing power. And if we can recognise that, we can make differences. And what happened to me was, in the early 90s, I met Fred Hollows, who was involved in trying to set up some blindness prevention programs in Eritrea in North Africa and Nepal. And Fred approached me because I had a background in manufacturing pharmaceuticals and medical devices and said, can you build these laboratories for me in Eritrea and Nepal? And I said, well, I'm not sure, Fred. I'll go and have a look and I'll give you a report. And at that time, and even today, there are 20 million cataract blind per year in the world. And the incidence of cataract blindness is also about the same amount. And everybody in this room will eventually get a cataract if you live long enough, because the lens of your eye gets denatured, gets cloudy. But in our country, you'll go to a surgeon in Remuera, pay him $3,000 and he'll fix it. But in developing countries, that surgery wasn't available. This is a patient with mature cataract on the left-hand side. You can see in the left-hand eye, he's got a big kind of white patch. And in the right-hand eye, he's got a corrective lens in. And the way that development agencies often deal with these issues is to fix the fundamental problem the guy can't see. So in 2002, when I met Fred, and Fred was had a lot of acrimony about WHO and the way that they dealt with these things, the way that you dealt with this was to give a person a pair of aphakic glasses. Now, if I put these on, what you do is you take the lens of the eye out and throw it away, but you need a focusing mechanism. So you put these glasses on, and that's going to work, isn't it? You know, and that's really, really good. I'll be your gynecologist today, darling. It's not going to... And, you know, but so it was a terrible, terrible operation. And if you lost your glasses, you were clinically blind, like me. So Fred knew that if you could make low-cost intraocular lenses, which is a little plastic lens that can be inserted into the eye, that you could fix that problem. And so he sent me off to Eritrea at the end of the 30-year war. And I'd never seen war up close and personal at all. But when I got to Eritrea at the end of the 30-year war, there was nothing functioning, no water, no cement works, and a burnt-out schoolhouse, which Fred said was going to be the state-of-the-art intraocular lens laboratory. And this is the hotel I was staying at, which had had a few holes in it because of the war. And this was the first time that I learnt that you should not only ask if your hotel room has a toilet and a door, but always ask if it's got a roof. Now, you know, building the laboratory was, you know, obviously a technical task. These laboratories have to be made to ISO CE mark standards, and that was a big ask in a country that had been at war for 35 years or so. So I asked the guys when we were trying to install some very sophisticated HEPA filtration systems, have you got a metal fabrication plant somewhere where we can get some metal and fabricate it into brackets? And he said, Mr. Ray, we have the tank graveyard. And that's the tank graveyard. And the problem with the tank graveyard was that it was about 3 clicks out of town, and I remember being taken out there in a van, and we're walking across this field, and I could see probably about several acres of burnt-out four-wheel drives, Bren gun carriers and tanks, and we were walking along, and suddenly the manager of the, or the to-become manager of the factory stopped and said, Mr. Ray, inadvertently, I may have taken you into a minefield. And the two words as a scientist that worry you, inadvertently and may. You know, and then the limp that he had became much more significant, you know, the limp. And I actually wanted to be on that Indian boat, you know, rowing the boat across from, you know, to Mauritius. So it was the longest 300 metres of my life getting out of there. But after some time, we did in fact commission this laboratory. And as you can see, it's not a third world laboratory, it's a state-of-the-art facility that makes intraocular lenses for the international market. And fortunately, because the technology originally didn't work, we were forced to innovate. And that innovation meant that we could reduce the cost of lenses from about $300 to about $5. And this slide's a little bit old because it says today 10 million people have their sight restored. But in fact, it's probably more like 15 million. And by the year 2020, we'll be looking at 30 million people who had their eyesight restored using this technology. So it shows you what you can do in a developing country setting with no resources, with a lot of infrastructure and tenacity. So once that happened, I thought to myself, well, what else can we do if this works? and we can make sustainable businesses because these laboratories offer as a profit, putting money into the local economy. What other healthcare issues could we look at that we could implement? And so we started to look at what are the big killers of children and people in developing countries. And I set up Medicine Mondiale to address those problems. And the other problem that we discovered was that the most common medical procedure in the world is intravenous infusion therapy, which is where you go in and you get some drugs put into you, or hydration therapy. And it's the most common medical procedure in the world. And if you're lucky enough to be born in Auckland, you'll get connected up to one of these infusion pumps. But in a developing country setting, you'll get a little roller clamp worth a few cents, which is really your passport to life or death, because 2 or 3 millimetres of movement will be the difference between your life and your death. And that technology on the left will never in my lifetime and your lifetime be deployed. Not because we can't make it cheaply enough, but we can't set up the distribution portals and the servicing portals to sustain it. So there was a hidden pandemic, really, that millions of people were dying just because they got the wrong dose of medicine. So I was a pharmacologist. I was looking for a magic bullet, like a drug that we could make, but it turned out this was a major killer. And the problem was exasperated with young children because they needed so small amounts of medicine that these roller clamps couldn't administer that amount. So the solution was this device that we invented, which is a little plastic device that can clip on to the outside of a drip set. And now, instead of being a safe cracker and just adjusting a roller clamp, you can actually dial up flow rate. And this is reusable. It clips onto the outside. So when you amortise the cost over hundreds or thousands of patients, it costs nothing. And that's the trick that you need to do in developing countries, is to come up with solutions that they can afford. They can't afford anything, just like the cigarette being passed down the road. And I'm pleased to tell you that in January next year, we'll begin commencing this in the Asia-Pacific region, which touches and will touch and will improve the health of over 2 billion people. New Zealand technology. One of the other things that we discovered was that another big killer is protein energy malnutrition. And when I came to New Zealand, I'd go out to these wonderful barbecues and somebody would squeeze a little bit of kiwi fruit on the steak to tenderise it. And innovators see these things and apply them. So we found out that if we applied a little bit of kiwi fruit enzyme, actinase, to meat products, particularly chicken, we could come up with a solution to protein energy malnutrition. So we developed a range of products using waste products from abattoirs and the kiwi fruit industry, which we can put into a little bag that costs 25 cents that we can get to millions of kids in developing countries. It's that innovation, the way that we work as New Zealanders, that makes it possible for us to change the world. But I'm a commercial animal as well as a scientist, so we took the protein stream from that product and applied it to the sports nutrition market, where sports nutritionists can use this technology, and that will help make a global connection. So we can make money out of the first world, and we can sustain the distribution in developing countries. What I want to impress upon you more than anything tonight is that Medicine Mondiale has no employees, not a single one. So how did we do this? I want you to do that. I want you to all stand up. Can you all please stand up? Stand up. And I want you to give yourself a big hand. Because all of this technology was developed by New Zealanders for free. They donated their time. People like you, you, and you, and you. And that is why we're special. And that is why we can take our place on the world stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Wonderful. And a great way to finish. You posed that rhetorical question, or in fact a real question, about innovation. Clearly it's something that the country is grappling with, that the government is grappling with. Why have we lost that edge? Because when you look back, this country has a wonderful legacy of innovation in so many areas.
Well, I think it comes out of the title of the talk when we talked about we haven't got any money, so we have to think. And when I was in orphanages in the UK, and I'll just go back to me wanting to own a cycle shop, I was limited by what I imagined I could do in the world by my knowledge. When my knowledge base increased, I realised I could actually be part of a community that could change the world. And that started off in very much the same pragmatic way as I imagine Kiwi Innovations did. I was in an orphanage, I looked at a light on the standard light next to me and I thought, how does that work? I unscrewed it, put my fingers in, and it was the most illuminating moment of my life. And I think Kiwis are the same. The number 8, they try things. Bert Munro putting pistons in. He didn't know what the amalgam was that went into the piston heads, but he gave it a go. And for me, that's the viscera and the energy that I get out of New Zealanders. They are ferociously tenacious and clever people.
Thank you very much. Fantastic.